So I've been giving a talk lately on this theme of the productivity paradox. And in its essence, what it's about is that as we've been trying to become more efficient, we've become less effective. And for the last few months, I've been really trying to dial into that topic, that theme of what's happening to us, that as we're trying to become more productive or using more tools to become more productive or organizing our lives to become more productive, in essence, we're becoming less productive. And my way of looking at that is that the origin of that word is coming from the word productus, which means to bring forth, and that really, in this day and age, to be productive in the work that many of us are doing and those that I'm interacting with, it's about bringing the very best of you forth, the very best of the qualities that you have. And in many ways, those are being hidden or kept away because we're too busy trying to just be a taskmaster, just trying to get through the to-do list, that we're not really being able to occupy the space within ourselves to actually do what we want to do, to bring our creative capacities forward. But today I had some thoughts which were quite removed from that theme of the productivity paradox, and I was thinking more broadly of living with paradox, because it's not just in that specific thing, it's in the broader essence of life. It's this constant tension, which is we are always going to be living with opposing forces within us, and they're essential to our well-being and to our livelihood and to our growth as well. And a very basic way to kind of enter into this and to think about it is hot and cold. Our experience of what is hot and our experience of what is cold is only because they are outside the range of our core body temperature. So experiencing water that is hot is because it is certain degrees higher than our core body temperature, and water that is cold is certain degrees colder than our core body temperature. So there are, if we look at it as a spectrum and this is the middle of our core body temperature, it can get colder and colder and colder, and it can get hotter and hotter and hotter, and that's because it gets further and further away from our core body temperature. Now, if you go to a sensory deprivation tank, you can lay there for an hour and you kind of lose yourself in it, because the water is at the temperature of your core body temperature, so you're not receiving it. You're in a sensory way, you're not receiving it because it's not showing you that this is different from my core body temperature. So that's an interesting thing to consider, that just the very understanding of what is hot and what is cold is relative to our core body temperature, because if we were to take a deep sea fish, which has a much lower core body temperature, its barometer of what's hot and cold is very different to us. So it all begins with where is our center. And this, plays out in everything. In what is sweet and sour, what is spicy and not spicy. It's down to our taste receptors, which is what we're born with, what we've inherited, the culture that we've grown up in. All of that is there's a central point there, and then it's what deviates outside of that. This was something that I became very interested in relation to focus, which was that I saw that so many people, when they would they would want to work at something, they would have something that they needed to do or wanted to do. So there was this intent, this desire to do it. But then when they came to actually try and start working on something, there would be all of this internal friction and agitation. And they would use that and perceive it as a signal that I can't focus. I need another coffee, or I need to go, I'm going to check on my phone because I don't like this discomfort. I don't like this uncomfortable feeling inside. But actually it's an essential ingredient to get to the place that you want to get to, because what's happening is you're shifting your attention, you're directing it onto a new point, and that will come with this discomfort that will last for a while. And suddenly you'll arrive to this point of balance, of an equilibrium. That happens in exercise as well, that if we're going for a run or any sort of cardiovascular or just form of exercise in general, if we're coming from a sedentary state where we're sitting or being still and relaxed, and then we shift into some form of movement, especially if it's something that's slightly more intense, at the beginning, that's going to feel really uncomfortable because your body's starting to organize itself. It's starting to rearrange itself based on what's needed in this moment. And that period of rearranging, that's going to come with all of this internal friction and discomfort. And then boom, you'll arrive at this new state of equilibrium, this new balance within yourself. And suddenly it will feel like it flows a lot easier. And I think in today's day and age, what's being fed to us is that we're living within polarities, but we're viewing the opposite as something that we should be able to get rid of. So, I mean, there's many places to look at this, but aging as one that's looked at. There's also, I see it with a lot of language of like fighting things, fighting cancer, fighting homelessness. I think it's much more interesting to look at like what's causing this, because there's things which are playing out against each other, which are leading to this. There's certain lifestyle issues which are causing the cancer. So maybe if we could look at both of those side by side to each other, then we can see them in their whole entity, as opposed to just saying, well, we're living in a certain lifestyle which is causing huge damage to our health and our well-being, and the consequence, the outcome of that is cancer, but now we're just focusing on killing cancer as opposed to recognizing as they're all part of one entity. And this is also happening very much so in the way that we're experiencing life, in the sense that there is this constant feeling of feeling overwhelmed, feeling like there's so much to do. I hear about it from so many people. And this also lives within the paradox of our time, which is that in being given the tools and the technologies that we have, it has opened up this immense wave of information which has just flooded out around us. So there's so many things to be attuned to be aware of, so many more people that we can be in contact with than we were able to 30 or 40 years ago. And with that comes immense blessings, opportunities to meet fantastic people, opportunities to stay in touch with people that are very far away, opportunities to go deep into things which are of an interest to you, which previously were blocked away, which were hidden, that you had to find out by being in a certain industry or in a certain university. Now it's totally available. So there's so many wonderful things here. And then there's also the opposing side of that, which is that there is so much to take in, that there are so many people's lives to be involved in, that it's so easy to be reached. We become so accessible. So in doing so, it becomes harder for us to actually decide what do I want to do, and most importantly, it becomes harder to actually create space. And a way of thinking about this is that it's quite similar to issues that are arising with our metabolism, and reasons why fasting is becoming such a lauded and explored thing today, which is because as food became so widely available and snacking became such a cultural thing, that it was easy just to grab something and to have a bite of it at any time of the day, this created a lot of metabolic and digestive issues, which led to people putting on weight, inflammation, chronic health issues, faster aging. And then what we found is that, okay, so these things are available to us. I can snack whenever I want. I can go to the supermarket 24 hours a day. I can get whatever kind of foods I want to get. But my body has these constraints within it. It can consume, but it needs to consume things which are nourishing. And then it needs a period of time to digest until I have my next meal. And if I have a meal and then I have a lot of snacks in between, it limits my digestion. And if that happens day after day after day, that causes inflammation. That inflammation causes issues. And then I end up with these health issues. And a way that I can treat that is that I can just enjoy the blessings that I have of being able to go to a supermarket whenever I want, being able to get such a broad array of different types of foods. But within that, I have to introduce some constraints which are related to my biology, the constraints that I have inherited from my evolution, which is that I can't let my blood sugar spike too much. I can't eat too many times throughout the day. It's good if I eat quite a bit before I go to bed, so that it means that I can actually digest sometime before I fall asleep, and then while I'm asleep, my body can heal and repair itself. And if I introduce those things, I mean, what a blessing. What a blessing it is to live in this day and age, to have an opportunity to eat all different types of cuisines and to eat all the foods you want to eat within a certain constraint. But if I don't do this, then what I get is all of the pleasure, the immediate pleasure, and I get all of the long-lasting suffering and pain as a consequence of that. But if I can put some restraint on the shallow pleasure, I get a lot of long-lasting pleasure from it, because I get a very fit and healthy body, and I get to choose how I want to eat. I get to choose how I want to live. The same is playing out in relation to how we navigate our lives with these digital tools, which is that we've been given this broad scope, just like a huge supermarket that has so many aisles and so many different offerings there. But within that, we have to identify where we want to place our time and our attention. And also within that, what we're going to give space to. And this is something that I'm seeing more and more, which is that the immense opportunities in how I'm experiencing and how I'm seeing others experiencing. Is this recording? I think it is still, yeah. Just double checking. The immense opportunities that I'm seeing myself experiencing and others experiencing today, some others, is being able to connect with great people, being able to dive deep into our practices, into the things that we want to learn, into the ways that we want to develop ourselves, and then creating space for the practice, space for the exploration. So to give more practical elements of that, what I mean is that there's been a huge shift in my life, which was I was somebody who was trying to be more and more and more productive in the sense of trying to get more done, trying to always be getting things done, trying to always be making use of my time, whether it was training or reading or working. And in doing so, creating these very kind of fixed containers of time where I had an intent of what I wanted to get out of it in advance. So if it was physically training, I know what I want to do in this period of time, these 45 minutes, these 60 minutes, these 90 minutes. When I'm going to work, I'm setting the plan of what I want to accomplish, what I want to get from this time. Even when I'm reading, approaching it, that I know exactly what I want to extract from the book. And that was helpful, and I'm glad that I went through that phase of developing those capacities in myself. But I also saw how limited it was, because it created this sense that ultimately it limited me, because I just kept working off what I knew I wanted, as opposed to allowing myself to be more exploratory and receptive to what's arising. So what I mean by that is now I give much longer windows of training, so that I have a few things that I want to do, but then I also give myself space and time to just kind of explore and play with things in the experience. And from that playfulness and exploration, things just arise. Or I will try and give myself just windows of time in the afternoon where there is nothing that's necessarily planned out, but I'm just doing what feels alive in relation to me in that moment. And this video has spun out of that. That's where I'm creating this video from, which was I gave myself a chunk of time this afternoon. I was practicing different things in relation to my balance, in relation to coordination. I wasn't going at it with this very narrow, fixed desire to work on something. I had things that I wanted to work on, but I was also very open to whatever was coming. And I have found that there's so much more insight that we can gather from this time that we're living in by going deep into experiencing things, which is in how we work, in how we practice, and how we train, and where we learn, and how we interact with others, so that we fully give ourselves to the interaction, to the conversation, being present with people, and that we are able to be curious and receptive to what's going on. And the complete opposite of this is the way that I used to experience life when I lived in New York, which is where time feels extremely compressed. So everything must have some sense of value. All interactions are quite transactional. It kind of gets into you like, is this person worth my time? Am I going to get something from this? Whenever you're at the gym or training, it's like, let's go, let's get it done. The same thing happens at work. And that creates, the things that come out of that in the businesses that we create are similar to that. And equally, that's the same kind of rhythm and pace that exists, that I see definitely in people that spend a lot of time on social media, which is they are constantly in this very fast rhythm. And because they can't remove themselves from that rhythm, they experience so much suffering inside. Because what's needed in life is, just in this living with polarized elements, is to be able to move between a fast rhythm and a slower rhythm, to be able to shift your state between the two. The same is true with our attention, so that I'm able to go into a much more deep, narrow, focused state of attention, but I'm also able to come out and I'm just able to be open and receptive to what the environment is giving me. And as this is going to become more and more common, in the sense of the way that AI is going to be deployed, there's just going to be a greater onslaught of information and things that are seemingly important to attend to. And those who live without those inner boundaries or inner limits are going to suffer greatly. Those who have the awareness and the understanding of themselves, of where my time and my energy is important and where it is not, will benefit massively. Because Herbert Simon said this in the 1970s, that information consumes its recipient, and its recipient is attention, humans' attention. And therefore, when there is an abundance of information, there is a poverty. An abundance of information, there is a poverty of attention. And that is what we're seeing today, which is that we're kind of coming to this tipping point, which is where we're feeling so saturated. Like tools like TikTok, it's very interesting how they were created. They were created just to base themselves on the algorithm. The founder recognized that there was too much noise when there was all of these other things going on, like that was happening in Facebook, in Facebook's products, in Instagram, where you could actually like choose and go and search for things and what you wanted and kind of curate things. The founder of TikTok self, I just build this all off the algorithm, very algorithmic, where it just keeps feeding you more and more and more of what you want in a tighter and tighter feedback loop. That will get people super hooked. And that's the way things are going today, that it's going deeper and deeper and deeper into that space. And the more you live in that realm, the more internal friction it creates, because it becomes harder and harder to come out of that, because you're just in that very fragmented state, which is faster and faster and faster, more and more and more consumption of information. But it's just like we spoke about in relation to our dietary consumption of food. We need space. It's much better to consume something that is nourishing for us, a nourishing meal, and then to have space and time to actually let it digest within us, to make it our own, and then let it go. And what's happening today is, because of this constant consumption and this sense that I can learn and gather knowledge and insights from YouTube Shorts and from TikTok Reels, they're just little snack bites. They're not really nourishing you, and you're never making it your own, because you're never sitting with the deep complexity of the thing that you want to learn. I see a lot of people nowadays who are like the mouthpieces for the podcast that they listen to. They haven't had a chance to actually sit with the things that they're consuming, because they haven't fully ingested it. They haven't fully made it their own. And this is where the amazing opportunities are in this age, but it requires you to rest with the tension, because there will always be the tension to get more done, to be more aware, to know more, because there is such a plethora of information available to us. But those of us who can actually establish those limits within their own lives will be the ones who will truly feel like they are limitless. But those who never establish those limits will experience the complete chaos of life, because they're being pulled by the environment. They've never actually established the boundaries and the limitations of what they want to exist within. Because those who establish those limits recognize that, yes, there is all of these opportunities, but I am also limited by the constraints of my body, of my mind, and the natural way that it functions. And it needs to consume, but it also needs to digest, and it needs to let things go. And if we're in this constant rat race of consumption and trying to do more and trying to be more productive with a very narrow view, we don't get the opportunity to step back and develop the capacity to actually engage in this much broader view, which is to see things from a clearer perspective, which allows us to actually make, I think, better informed decisions from a much more stable place, from a place that isn't so reactive. And it just makes life so much more enjoyable. I feel so blessed to live in this time of our lives, to have these tools, to have these technologies. And I recognize that to continue to enjoy it, it requires to live with the tension of these paradoxes, these opposing forces. So I hope you can, from a sense of this, start to appreciate that daily life is full of tension in sitting in between certain paradoxes as we shift from one state to another, one way of being to another. It doesn't mean you can't focus. It doesn't mean you don't have the stamina. It doesn't mean you have to stop. It just means that we just have to be aware of what's happening, the changes internally, and to move through it. And to recognize that these things are always going to be opposing each other. But what we need is to recognize our center that sits within it. Because we can come back to that analogy of the hot and the cold. The only way that we can establish that we're too far into water that's too hot or too cold is because we're aware of what our center is. I had the experience many years ago of doing an open water swimming race, and I was trying to do it without a wetsuit. And I was too zealous, and I went for a long swim. I think it was maybe a week or a week and a half into training. I was living in Ireland at the time. And I nearly got hypothermia from it, because what I should have done was slowly introduce myself into that cold water for longer periods of time and let my body slowly adjust to those changes. I needed to get into the cold water and then come out, to get in and then come out, and go for longer and longer, a little bit each time, instead of throwing myself in so deeply that I created a huge reaction in my system, which didn't want to go near the cold water for quite a few days after that. And I had to recognize and appreciate that I'm living with these biological mechanisms which are signaling to something when I've come away from my center. And I think a lot of the pain that people are suffering today internally is because they're not able to receive those signals that are coming from the body, which is to say, you need space, you need time, you need to come back to me, come back to spending time with me. Please stop consuming all of this. Because I think we are our own greatest teachers, and when we can learn to be out in the world and do things and really use our skills and our talents and follow our curiosities, but also come back to ourselves, when we can enter into that dance of going out and coming back in, that's such a beautiful lived experience. But with that, it comes with allowing and accepting the daily tensions that come with the opposing forces of life.